Critical thinking? That's a tough subject actually. Why? I think right now there is tons of people that really struggle with this because there's so much information. We're drowning in information, and I think we're starving for wisdom. I think common sense is no longer common. With everybody having the access to the internet, anybody can put any information out there, total lies, total made up stuff, and it's out there. And people would believe that a lot more than reliable sources. See, back in the day, there were real serious consequences to lying and spreading the news that was false, but not today. Anybody can make up any story and no consequences to it whatsoever. But interestingly enough, if you were one of Jehovah's Witnesses, critical thinking was really hard. It was really hard. Not that people were not intelligent, but it was very difficult to see what is real, what it's not. Because the way things were structured, the way things are still structured until today, were in such a way that it was very difficult to see what is real, what is not, what is right, what is wrong, what is false, what is true. Let me walk you through some of the examples, and I'm pretty sure you will relate to it, because I was thinking exactly the same way, and when I started waking up, I realized how important it is to learn first what is real, what is not, and what is true, what is not. I made a video about what is truth. Please watch it. It has a lot of elements. I don't want to repeat myself, but it's very valuable to learn those three truths: the objective truth, authoritative truth, and personal truth. Those three things are very important to learn in order for us to think critically. But why was it such a struggle as a Jehovah's Witness? Well, obviously, if you grew up in it, then whatever you were presented, you took it as real. If you lived anywhere in the world and you're growing up in certain religion, you would take that religion as truth, because we accept reality as it is presented to us. So if you were born in Afghanistan, chances are you would be a Muslim. If you were born in a hardcore India, chances are you'll be a Hindu. If you were born in Italy, most likely you'll be a Catholic. But if you were born in a Jehovah's Witness religion, the indoctrination would be there, just like in any other religion. And you would take what they tell you as truth, because that's the reality you were presented with. But interestingly enough, when we were there were certain things structured specifically in such a way to prevent us from thinking outside the box. Things like installing fear of asking questions, fear of don't trust your heart because it's treacherous. Do not rely on your own thinking. Satan is a roaring lion, and the information that we got from the world is all satanic and demonic, and he's using it as trap to devour the sheep ones. This is a real challenge because of this fear. Many people, all what they do is looking for information only from one source. And if you're looking for information only from one source, chances are you're going to be biased. You're going to be accepting what these people are telling you as an authoritative truth. Because if you believe that somebody's smarter than you in specific subject, you're going to accept their truth as yours. And you're going to think these people are smarter than me in this aspect, therefore I believe them. Most Jehovah's Witnesses did not do a research deep enough. And they were saying, you know what, these brothers there in Bethel, they do the research. They sitting there studying the Bible. They have a whole team of people who would go and check the references and check the history and check the Bible and the references, the different translations. I don't have time for that. They're smarter than me in that aspect. Plus, it is a God's channel of communication with me and the congregation. Therefore, why would I question the channel? And they would use phrases like, well, Jehovah is trusting a faithful and discreet slave. Would you trust that faithful and discreet slave? They would say things like, even if the faithful and discreet slave would say things that are illogical, your survival of Armageddon will depend on your loyalty to the organization. Not based on truth, not based on love, not based on faith. It's all based on loyalty. And because of it, people make that link. If I'm loyal, regardless of truth and regardless of critical thinking and regardless of whether something makes sense or not, it doesn't matter if something's logical. If I'm loyal, I'll survive. And this is why that fear is so great of looking at anything outside the box. Because that thought of, if I look outside the box, I am in the Satan's table. They're saying, don't feed yourself from the table of demons, because anything outside of Jehovah's Witness organization was viewed as information from the table of demons. Enormous amount of fear. And I fell for it. I was really scared. But when I was doing my own research, I thought, Satan's attacking me. My heart was beating really hard. I was hiding from my wife. I closed the doors, closed the windows, right? I just wanted to make sure that nobody sees me. And even later, I would go to a library and I would buy a book. What was it? I was buying a Bible, a different translation, and I was scared. I was like, what if somebody sees me? What if somebody sees me in the congregation? Like, why would you buy a Bible with a different translation? You don't trust our translation? I was just hiding that Bible. That's how crazy it is. Fear everywhere. But if you're courageous enough to start asking questions, you may start developing a critical thinking muscle. It literally is like a muscle. So the first thing in order to start thinking critically is you have to learn how to ask questions. How to ask questions. Because Jehovah's Witnesses had a very specific way of asking questions. They were asking what we call a leading questions. It was not an open-end questions. A leading question is a question when you presuppose the answer. I'll give you an example. Let's say there was an assembly, and after the assembly, they would ask at the meeting, what did you learn from the assembly? Now, that is a leading question because it presupposes that you actually learned something. You get it? They would ask, what blessings did you receive from being a pioneer? It presupposes that you received the blessings. What benefits did you have by serving in Bethel? It presupposes that you had benefits by serving in Bethel. They would never ask questions like, was there anything interesting at the convention? Did you find anything interesting? Because that is an open-end question, and you could say, no, it was boring. I didn't like it. They would never ask that because that would allow you to answer yes or no. They structure the questions in such a way that they presuppose the answers. Very famous one that I saw many times is, what proofs do we have that the faithful and discreet slave is directed by Holy Spirit? What proofs do we have? You automatically looking for proofs. There is no question if they are directed by Holy Spirit. No, that question would never be asked because that would allow you to think whether they are actually directed or not. You would evaluate evidence for and against that theory. No, what proofs do we have? That's a very biased question when it leads you to an answer that they want you to go to. I remember when I was preparing my talk and one of the elders was helping me and I had open-end questions. And he said, it's better not to ask them. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'll show you how to ask better questions. And he showed me a whole bunch of leading questions when you would lead the congregation into thinking into a specific outcome. I'm like, well, that's not critical thinking. You're not coming up with your own answers. You're just presupposing the answer in the question. And this is why it was so difficult to recognize the questions and the answers that we would come up with. Very, very important to learn how to ask an open-end questions that would allow you to say yes, that will allow you to say no, that will allow you to think about, let me gather the evidence, let me look at things from different perspectives. Number 2, gather information, gather the evidence. So when you're gathering evidence, the first question you got to ask yourself is, what is a good evidence? Because very quickly we could say, you know what, this person said therefore it's true. That is not true on its own, just because somebody said that. We could trust that person, but that is what we call authoritative truth. Objective truth is when we look at things objectively that are outside of our mind. That objective truth never changes. That's what it's real. And it has to be detectable, it has to be measurable, and it has to be repeatable. If it's detectable, it's real. If it's detectable by 5 of our senses or any of the instruments that we have that can measure things like sonar or radiation, those things can be translated into a visual guide, and this way we could determine whether something is real or not. Is it detectable? If it's not detectable, it's not measurable, and it's not repeatable, chances are it's somebody's opinion. It's not truth. It's just simply he said, he experienced, personal truth. We believe somebody else because we think they are experts better than us. They understand this subject better than me, therefore they must be right. We trust somebody else's opinion over our own if we hold somebody into a position of authority. Now, it could be our personal experience. We could experience things and our eyes can trick us. We see something, we hear something, and we conclude that it's real. But time and time again, we realize that our mind could trick us. People saw things and they imagined that the mind literally created images, very strong images, in their heads. And later on, they thought they experienced this for real, while it wasn't. Countless examples of 9/11 when the airplanes hit the towers and people saw the information on the news, but because of emotional trauma that happened at that time, they actually thought that they witnessed those events with their own eyes. And then a year later, they're telling the story like they saw it, like they were there, they saw the people. And it was proven that they were not there, they were in a different place. It was impossible for them to see it. But they vividly imagined something so strongly that their mind tricked them into believing something that it wasn't real. Our mind can trick us. Our memory can trick us. So it's very important actually not to rely fully on what you experience. And if you experience something, believe it only as your personal truth. And that it's not proven. I could tell you, I had a dream last night that I flew to Europe. There is no evidence for it. I cannot prove it to anybody. It is my personal experience. You could believe it, but I could make this up. And you have no way of testing it, whether this was real or not. Very important to understand this. So testing, when it comes to testing, if somebody comes up with a theory and they would say this, I have this rabbit's foot or a crystal or any type of object, and this object brings good luck, or it heals people, or it has some sort of magic powers that will allow you to do something that normal people can't do it. It is equally lazy, intellectually lazy, to say, I don't believe it, this is all BS, get this out of my face, you're a scammer. It is equally lazy to take it and pay for it. Here's my $100, I'm buying it, I want what the results that you're saying. Because at that moment, when somebody makes a claim, it's a time to ask good questions. If somebody says, you know what, this crystal, this magical crystal that came from Himalayas, it will cure cancer. And I know it, I'm 100% convinced because my uncle had cancer and all the doctors said this person will die. And we bought this crystal, we put it right next to his bed, and guess what? He got better and today he's cancer free. There is no other explanation than accept this rabbit's foot, crystal, or whatever it is that they're using, whatever it is that they're selling, and they're using that specific example to say this is the result that you're going to get if you buy this product. That is a theory. At this moment, you start asking questions. You say, okay, is this an isolated incident? How many people with cancer were actually helped with this crystal? Is it possible that we buy a whole bunch of those crystals and we put it underneath the beds of people with cancer in the hospital, but we're only going to put it in half of the hospital and we're not going to tell people that the crystal is there? So we eliminate the biases, because some people would actually get better simply by what we call placebo effect. Just the belief, just the thought that something is helping you creates a change in our physiology. So let's just put it underneath people's beds and do not tell them. And then watch the results, document the results, look at the hardcore statistic over a long period of time, over 1,000 patients, and then see if there is any evidence of seeing that this thing works. You start asking a critical thinking questions, and you'll see that the person will not have any of that evidence. It is usually based on what we call a coincidence. And some coincidences can be extraordinary. It could be extraordinary coincidence. So what you want to do is through the asking of the questions, you want to eliminate the error of a personal error or the error of the experiment. Because somebody could be biased. Somebody can just believe the story because it was a coincidence, or they simply cherry pick data. This is one of the hardest things for us to do, because our mind, sometimes we'll believe something because we want to believe it. We're desperate to believe it, especially if somebody's sick or they're dying and they're like, they don't know what else to do. So in order to protect themselves, protect their life, they will pay for anything. I've seen this over and over again, and that's what happens very often with religion. People don't want to die, and somebody knocks on their door, and they say, hey, we have a great news. Here's a good news from the Bible, from this magazine, from the Faithful and Discreet Slave, from this prophet, whatever it is that they believe in, and they will comfort people with stories and with theories that cannot be tested and they cannot be proven as right. And they will cherry pick data to make things look like it is real, and people out of desperation will follow the stories. It is actually very good habit to learn about other religions. I remember for myself, when I started learning about other religions, it was quite clear to me where the patterns came from. And it's very important to learn about the patterns. How did people start believing in gods themselves? And it was very clear pattern of cause and effect. We live in a Newtonian world where we see the cause and effect. For every action, there is equal and opposite reaction. If we see an effect, we automatically assume there was a cause. Problem is if we don't understand what the cause is. So when we see a lightning in the sky and people didn't understand where the lightning comes from, where the thunder comes from, they had to invent a cause. The cause was Thor. They invented a god that had a big hammer and he was smashing it. That was caused that noise and the lightning. Because they saw fog coming down from the mountain, and there was a fog over here, and the fog collided, and there was no lightning and there was no thunder. Therefore, the clouds themselves, when they join together, cannot produce a lightning and thunder. That was their reasoning. Guess what? They invented a god that was angry at them because they sinned. And because they sinned, now they have to provide sacrifice. Whether it was a virgin, a firstborn son, or whether it was their crops, or animals, or fish, they would give this to the god, throw it, burn it, whatever they had to do, and then the thunder would go away, and the lightning would go away. And then they would conclude, because we gave that sacrifice, now no more lightning, no more thunder. Cause and effect. If it was windy, people saw big waves. But there was a tsunami one day, no wind. Well, how can there be no wind and tsunami is coming. How can you explain that? Well, you can't. Probably Poseidon got upset with us because we didn't worship enough. We have to give sacrifice. He punished us for not being faithful. The same pattern is happening in every religion. People still believe if something is good happening in their life, God is blessing them. If something bad happening in their life, God is withholding his blessing or he's punishing them purposely. And this is how people go to church and they give tons of money hoping that God will bless them. People will pray over and over again thinking, you know what, this actually will heal that person. It breaks my heart to see how many people fall for those evangelical priests and preachers who would pretend that they're healing people with magical powers. They would never go to any hospital. They only do it with specific crowd, with specific patients, and they would never do it something that can be documented. So if somebody lost an arm and a leg, these people, I'm sorry, God doesn't deal with those. Only people who look healthy and they say they're not, all of a sudden they stand up from a wheelchair. Interesting. Critical thinking. Start asking questions. Why? Is it possible to test it? Is it possible to experience it? Is it possible to measure it? When it comes to measurement, this is one of the biggest challenge when it comes to religion. Because when a religion comes up with their own measuring tools, this is when the reality gets distorted. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have a word like generation, we know what generation is. The definition of a word generation is a group of people that were born around the same time, and it lasts until they have their offsprings. On an average, about 30 to 40 years. That is a definition of a generation. Now, if Jehovah's Witnesses would come up with a doctrine, and all of a sudden time proves that the doctrine is wrong, well, they have two choices. Admit that they were wrong, or start twisting reality. Unfortunately, they would start twisting reality. They would just say, all we have to do is change the definition of the word generation and things will stretch. So we'll say, well, generation can mean a lifetime of a person. Well, now we have, instead of 30, 40 years, it can go up to 80, 90 years even. Well, when that time passed, now we can start twisting the word again. It's like, imagine somebody says, well, how big is this table? And everybody comes and measures, yeah, it's 6 feet long. That table is 6 feet long. And somebody shows up and says, no, this table is 10 feet long. I'm like, well, how do you figure? And they come up with their own measuring tape, with their own markings that do not match anybody else's markings. And they put it there, like, see, based on my measuring tape, this table is 10 feet long. Well, if you're changing the measuring tape, right, then of course you could believe it, and whoever believes your measuring tape will be convinced that the table is 10 feet long. That's the problem. When you're in that environment and the people at the top are controlling how we measure things, then the reality gets distorted. I'll tell you how I came across this challenge when it comes to logical thinking and how the reality was distorted. See, Jehovah's Witnesses have this habit that the structure of making decisions all behind the closed doors. So we could actually see our government debating from one side to the other side publicly on TV, and the decisions and voting are made all right in front of us. But not among, as a matter of fact, I think most religions are like that. They close the doors, only selected few are in it, and they're making decisions. When they make those decisions, first they make a decision based on their beliefs, what is right and wrong, and then afterwards they look for scriptures to back that up. I'll give you a perfect example. we had to choose an elder or a ministerial servant. And the first thing that happens is they give every elder a list of all the brothers with their hours. And you're looking at that and you're like, okay, this brother has 8 hours. We're not going to consider him. This one has got 10 hours and the average is 10 hours. So it's like, we'll see. This guy's got 11 hours or 12 hours. He's above average. Let's consider him. And then let's take a look. Is he involved with building of the kingdom halls? Is he involved with cleaning of the kingdom hall? Is he involved with sound system or the magazines? Or is he involved with caring for the microphones? We do all those checks. Yes. Okay, good. Now we check on his wife. Is his wife modest? Is she regular at the meetings? Is she going to service? What are her hours? And then we go like, yes. Then we vote. And then we ask, well, do you think the brother so-and-so should be considered to be an elder or ministerial servant? Everybody votes, unanimous, great. And then after that happened, after we literally made the decision, the coordinator said, then let's look at the Bible and see if there are any scriptures in it that would prevent us from making the announcement. And when he said that, I was like, wait a minute. We just made the decision. We all voted for it. And every single criteria that was mentioned had nothing to do with the Bible. Zero. And then after, like, yep. Husband of one wife, does not drink too much. He's got a freedom of speech. He has got a good opinion. Great. He can be a ministerial servant. And then we had another person. Half of the people said, yes, this person should be a ministerial servant. Half of the people said no. And then the coordinator said, well, because it's not unanimous, there's no point of opening the Bible. And I'm like, what? That means we're making the decisions not based on what the Bible says, but we're making the decisions based on whatever is that we want, based on our category, based on our measuring tape. And then we cherry pick the scriptures to see if it matches what we already decided. Then we go into the kingdom hall, we open the Bible, said, brothers, please open the Bible. We read the scriptures and we say, based on these scriptures, we chose this person. When you do things backwards, they are always perfect. Imagine this. Imagine I would blindfold a person and I would tell them, you know what, just before I would blindfold them, I would say, mark on this arrow your name, sign your name on this arrow to make sure there's no other arrow like this. Then we would blindfold you. And then would say, shoot that arrow through those bushes as far as you possibly can. And you did. And then a whole bunch of people witnessed this. Then I would take you and let's find where the arrow is. And we found that there was this huge barn wall. And on that barn wall, right in the middle, there was this arrow with a target all around it. And guess what? That arrow hit the bullseye. It's right there in the middle. I mean, how could that happen? Then you look, is this the real arrow? Does it have your signature on it? And then you prove to the people around you that this is the right arrow, that nobody else moved that arrow. There was no other arrow around it. Nobody else could possibly shoot it. Everybody witnessed this. And guess what? They would say, Holy Spirit. I mean, even the best archers in the world would not make this shot. How do you explain it? Well, there's one piece of information that they're not telling us. They're simply not telling us that after the arrow was shot, somebody painted the target around it. Afterwards. That is why it was impossible for an average Jehovah's Witness to understand what is happening behind the closed doors, because they presented things to us in such a way we had no chances of seeing it. Because I realized that when we were choosing an elder or ministerial servant, and I thought, what if the governing body is doing the same? They're closing the doors and they're making decisions on doctrines. And guess what? Half of the people say, yes, we agree with this doctrine. Half the people say, no, we do not agree with this doctrine. You know what that means? And this is what I learned from Raymond's book when he was on the governing body. So I'm not just imagining this. He was an eyewitness. That means that those people in the governing body who disagree with a specific doctrine, if they're outvoted, because they had this 2/3 rule, so if 2/3 of the governing body says yes, then the motion passes. That means 1/3 says no. The moment they leave the room, they can't say that they voted against it. They could say, you know what, we vote against the doctrine of 607. We realized there was a major error in that calculation. And if anybody studied this history and sees why Jehovah's Witnesses are the only people who believe in 607 and why there is tons of evidence against it, literally tens of thousands of evidence against it, and then 1/3 would say, we should remove it. We should actually make it moves by 20 years. Then they're outvoted and they leave the room. And if anyone in the congregation that they're serving would say exactly the same thing what they're saying, they would say, I don't believe in 607. They have the obligation to disfellowship that person as an apostate, even though they themselves don't agree with it. Can you imagine? And it's happening all the time because they have to make decisions as a collective. And if they personally disagree with a decision here and there, the moment they leave the room, there's nothing they can do. They have to agree with the majority. They have to teach what the majority decided, even though they personally disagree with it. And if anybody else in the congregation thinks like they do, they are being shunned for being rebellious. Now that's messed up. Learn how to evaluate evidence. That is super important. Next one. What if you're wrong? That is a very good question to ask. I think the whole process of waking up from Jehovah's Witnesses really taught us how to evaluate evidence, and the fact that we could be wrong. We could believe something really strongly. We could believe something so strong that we're willing to die for it. But what if we're wrong? What if just our belief is not enough? It is very important to evaluate other people's opinions and see it from different perspectives. And if anything valuable that I learned from waking up from Jehovah's Witnesses was the fact that by learning why people stop believing something would give me a lot better perspective than going towards people who only see one perspective. So if I want to know whether a certain investment is good or bad, I would go and ask people who invested in this specific sector, and then they decided to sell their investment. Why are they selling? I want to know. Why are they selling? Because one person can very easily persuade you into believing something, and then you're going to put your money on the line. You're going to put your life on the line. You're going to put your future on the line, simply because you see only one side of the story. If you just listen to Jehovah's Witnesses, they will only tell you the good about being in a congregation. They will never tell you about the bad and ugly. You ask an ex-Jehovah's Witness, why did you leave? Why did you stop believing? What did you experience after you left? What was your experience while you were leaving? They're going to tell you the good, bad, and ugly. Find out from as many perspectives as you possibly can. That doesn't mean they're right, but what it gives you is a perspectives on the same subject from different angles, and then you will have a much better chances of being right. That doesn't mean you're right. It means you're eliminating error of being wrong. Because if you're just looking at something on one perspective, chances are the margin of error is going to be really high. They say that it's not the ignorance that makes us, that puts us in trouble. It's believing that something is true while it's not. That is what causes us the most pain, the most trouble. When we believe something that to be true and then it's not, we call it delusion, and we all could be deluded. When there is certain evidence presented to us, we take it as truth, although it's not, but we're convinced. Sometimes it's difficult to think critically because we can very easily cherry pick data. So when somebody tells you something, look at this, look at that, I would always encourage you to just gather more information. Don't just take that person's word for it. If somebody went and saw an ocean and took a bucket and took the water out of the ocean and examined the water and said, I saw the ocean, I've been there, I examined the water in it, there are no sharks there. There are no sharks in the ocean. Well, his opinion is very limited by the amount of data that he received. And he could tell you his experience. So it's very important to say, you know what, I value your opinion, but I'm going to take it as your opinion. I need more data. And if somebody tells you, you know what, you got to tell me what you believe. This was a big challenge for Jehovah's Witnesses because they are very black and white about what they believe or where do they stand. Because if you believe everything that Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, then you are an active Jehovah's Witness. If you start questioning even a 5% of it, you actually could be labeled as an apostate, dangerous, and they'll kick you out. It's like everything or nothing. However, there is more to life than truth and false. People are saying, well, it's rather true or it's a lie. Well, no, there is more to life than that. There are myths, there are legends, there are hypotheses, there are opinions. It does not mean that it's a lie. There are beliefs. There are beliefs that we believe that something is true and it's not. That doesn't mean that we're lying. It basically means there is an error in our beliefs. There is maybe missing data. Maybe we're making decision based on that much information while we should be making our decision based on more information. When you gather the information, the more information you gathered, the better decision you can make. The reason why we want to gather more information from different perspectives, different people, different sources, to eliminate error. And be open-minded. I think that's one of the biggest challenges when people swing from, I know the truth, as a Jehovah's Witness would say, to I know the truth about the truth, and now I'm discrediting everything that the person says. Very often I get asked, well, do you believe in God or not? Not because they want to know, but because they want to discredit me, because if I don't say what they believe in, then they would automatically say, oh, no. If this is what you believe, then there is nothing that you say has a value. It's used to discredit people. So be very careful about discrediting people simply because you disagree with their opinion. Because just because you disagree with a point or two, that doesn't mean that everything that they're saying is wrong. But we were taught like this when we were Jehovah's Witnesses. We were believing everything that the organization was saying. And if we would find one mistake in anybody else outside, it's like, well, we discredit that person because that's falsehood. And would cherry pick their mistakes in order to discredit that person. It was a very common pattern. We have to get rid of that. We got to see for the person what they're saying and test it and gather more information. And then we come with our own conclusions. And even if we are certain that whether this belief is true or not, we got to leave ourselves a little margin of error. We can say, you know what, this is what I believe today. This is why I believe it. But I'm leaving myself a little bit of space, because if tomorrow I will gather more information and there will be more evidence that could emerge tomorrow, we don't know, then I will change my mind based on the new evidence. But based on what I know now, this is the most accurate conclusion that I have. That doesn't mean it's true. It means I believe it's true. And that is a great lesson. Learn how to think critically. It will help you to make better decisions, and it will protect you from being tricked from many people who sincerely believe that they're telling you the truth, although what they believe has an error.